I'm Simon Longstaff and welcome to the City Recital Hall, Angel Place here in Sydney. So there's lots for all of us in this region to be debating on the motion before us tonight that we have nothing to fear from a powerful China. And we actually have for you tonight a stellar panel. Arguing for the motion is Joanne Wood, founder and chairman of Capital 8, an investment banking house headquartered in Shanghai. And joining her is Dr. Rizal Sukma, who's executive director of the Centre for Strategic and International Studies in Indonesia. Would you please welcome them? And against the motion, Dr. John Lee, an expert on China's political economy at the Centre of International Security Studies at Sydney University, and he's joined by Dr. Michael Wesley, the Executive Director of the Lowy Institute for International Policy. Please welcome them. Please welcome Joanne Wood.
Thank you, Simon. The 21st century has been characterised as the Asian century. But in the case of China, it will not be the first time that the country has been recorded in history as a great power. China last flourished over 400 years ago during the Ming Dynasty. But this time around, there is a difference, and quite a significant difference. For the very first time in human history, we will see a nation join the ranks of world superpowers whilst it is still a developing country. Early in 2012, China's birth rate dropped below the number of newborns required to sustain a future workforce in order to support its ageing population. There is now a danger that China will grow old before it grows rich. It's not a reason to fear China, though. In fact, we have no reason to fear China. We have absolutely everything to gain. Thank you.
Please welcome Dr. John Lee.
Thank you. Now, as you know, I am here to argue against the proposition that we have nothing to fear from a powerful China. We have to respond to the world as it is and not as we would like it to be. And there are things to admire about China's rise, but there are also things to fear. The right thing to do is to hope for the best, but to understand the risks and prepare for the worst. Now, the problem is that the current and future intentions of the government in China are not just unknown, they are almost unknowable. It is actually next to impossible to know how decisions are actually made, why they're made, and even by whom. Now, why should we care, or why does it matter how China is ruled to us? In foreign affairs, the presumption is that the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. A powerful government that has less need to compromise, tolerate dissent, negotiate, or explain itself to its own people is more likely to behave the same way towards smaller or weaker powers in the event of a dispute. Remember that China is rising as an immensely dissatisfied power in Asia. It has no genuine allies or security partners to speak of. It has territorial disputes with countries such as India, Japan, several countries in Southeast Asia, and of course there's the issue of Taiwan. It is also rising in an Asia where every other great power is a democratic country. Thank you very much.
Please welcome Pak Rizal.
Thank you, Simon. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The fear of China has also been driven by the perception of America's decline. So the US might be in some economic troubles, but it is still by far the most powerful country on earth. And that is not going to change for the next few decades. Its military presence is found at every corner of the globe. China is powerful, but it is not the only powerful one in the neighborhood, and it will not become the only powerful state in East Asia. It is a big elephant in a room full of big elephants. The US, India, Japan are still great powers, and also great players, in these regions. So any attempts, by China to establish a Chinese-dominated order will certainly, met with a strong resistance, from these, powers. Most of the East Asian countries are actually close allies or partners, to the United States. If China ever tries to undermine stability and peace in the regions with its military might, would soon become a natural policy choice, for these countries in the region. So I think China understands, this well. So at the end, fear is a reflection of our lack of confidence in one's own strength and an exaggeration of others. So believe me, we are far too strong, than you would otherwise believe. To fear China is to degrade our own strength. Thank you very much.
Please welcome Dr. Marco Wesley. Well, thank you, Simon. First of all, big countries are big not only physically, they are big in terms of their conception of their role in the world. Big countries have always started much smaller than they turned out. Big countries always expand. Big countries find that the appetite grows with the eating, that each time they expand a little bit, they get an appetite for a little bit more. And that is the case throughout history. Look how Rome started. Look how the Spanish Empire started. Look how the British Empire started. Look how America started. Every time the Americans expanded and they got to the Mississippi, they said, that's the natural limits of America. But then they saw the other shore and they kept expanding. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the way China started. That the more powerful a country, the less willing it is to put up with what it dislikes about the world. There is plenty that China is not happy about in the world. Another thing to realise is that China is the only modern great power that has an historical memory of being a great power. It realises what it was like, and from this, China has a great sense of itself in the world, that China is resuming a place at the forefront of nations. So in concluding, ladies and gentlemen, I would say, in my sense, to fear China is to learn to understand it, but not to lose our heads about what China means. Thank you. Well, we've heard from our speakers, and in a moment it will be your choice within the audience to speak, to ask a question, to make a comment, or to try and sway the debate with your own arguments. Microphone 3, your name, please.
My name is Jong Dong. I'm a Tibetan whose parents and grandparents were forced out of their homeland when Tibet was invaded by newly communist China in the 1950s. All of you have talked how China has, become powerful over the last 50 years. And to say that there's nothing to fear against this powerful China is to ignore the lived experience of my country.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to microphone 2.
Su Biermann. China is different because in its 5,000-year-old history, it's been the top of its game at least half a dozen times, and its borders are primarily unchanged, even allowing for the Tibet and some of the other areas. But unlike the Spanish, the British and other colonisers, it didn't actually move and war and take over and export its language and its ideology or its law. So I would, to answer your question, actually say that yes, China is different. It has a huge pride in its ethnicity, and it really doesn't necessarily want to take us on board.
Thank you. A lot of friends there. Microphone 1, if you could introduce yourself. And
Karl Jansky, University of Sydney. I have a question about military power. Mao Zedong said that power grows out of the barrel of a rifle or a gun, and the United States 7th Fleet is the greatest naval fleet in the history of the human race. I'm not an expert, but I read the military literature, and just recently it appears that China could deny the 7th Fleet access to the space between mainland China and Taiwan primarily due to a whole bunch, several thousand, of pilotless drones, remote-controlled with bombs, that could, with their sheer numbers, overcome the sophistication of the defence system of the 7th Fleet. So, in one small aspect, is it true that China can overcome the United States as a military power? That's my question.
Well, now it's time for the final poll results. So just to go back, before the debate started, these were the results. Undecided were 30.11%, for 33.24%, and against, just ahead, 36.65%. So how has the result changed? Undecided has dropped to a minuscule 5.48%. For the motion, 22.91%, but with a massive win, 71.61% against the motion. Those are the results for the motion that we have nothing to fear from a powerful China.